Les Américains se trompent en croyant qu'en bombardant le Nord, il pourra gagner la guerre dans le Sud. Jamais, jamais, ils gagneront cette guerre.
Welcome, everyone. Today we're diving deep into one of the most complex, misunderstood, and debated conflicts of the 20th century, the Vietnam War. Why did this war start? How did a superpower like the United States get dragged into a long and exhausting conflict? And how did a smaller, less equipped force manage to fight back with such determination? Throughout this episode, we'll use maps, archival footage, and simple explanations to break everything down, just like the classic educational shows. By the end, you'll understand not only the battles, but the geography, the politics, the daily life of soldiers, and the long-lasting legacy of this war. Why did the war start? To understand the beginning, we must go back to the end of World War II. Vietnam, once under French colonial rule, sought independence. After years of tension, the country split in two. North Vietnam, communist, led by Ho Chi Minh. South Vietnam, anti-communist, supported by Western allies. This separation created a fragile balance. Add the Cold War rivalry between the United States and the Soviet Union, plus China's influence, and Vietnam quickly became a key point on the global chessboard. Inside the South, a guerrilla movement, the Viet Cong, began fighting to reunify the country under communist rule. For the United States, stopping communism from spreading in Asia became a strategic priority. And just like that, what started as a local conflict turned into one of the most symbolic battles of the Cold War. The forces involved. Now let's look at who fought this war. First, the American GIs, heavily equipped, wearing standardized uniforms, helmets, radios, and carrying modern weapons. They represented the most technologically advanced army of the time. Facing them were two very different opponents, the Viet Cong, local guerrilla fighters. They knew the terrain, moved silently, and used camouflage and improvisation as their strongest weapons. The North Vietnamese Army, NVA, disciplined, organized troops operating with structured military units often equipped by the USSR and China. Both sides had completely different strategies. The US relied on firepower, helicopters, aerial support, and large bases. The Viet Cong and NVA relied on stealth, mobility, ambush tactics, and the complex local geography. Seeing their equipment side by side, from GY helmets to Viet Cong sandals, shows just how different their worlds were. The jungle, the first enemy. The first enemy for many American soldiers in Vietnam wasn't another soldier. It was the jungle itself. When young troops arrived from cities like Chicago or farms in Kansas, they stepped into a world that felt almost alien. The air was thick and heavy as if you could drink it. Temperatures soared past 35 degrees Celsius, 95 degrees Fahrenheit, and humidity was so intense that sweat never dried. Clothes stayed damp for days, boots grew mold, and skin infections became routine. But it wasn't just uncomfortable, it was disorienting. The jungle swallowed sound, light, and distance. A man just 10 meters away could disappear behind a curtain of vines. Navigation became a daily struggle. Maps looked nothing like the twisting rivers, bamboo forests, and dense undergrowth stretching endlessly in all directions. And the jungle hid everything. Tunnels carved deep below the ground, booby traps hidden under leaves and mud, sniper nests camouflaged in trees, supply routes invisible from the sky. To the Viet Cong, this terrain was home. To To U.S. troops, it was a maze. Days blurred together in the heat. Nights were the hardest. Patrols moved slowly through darkness so complete that soldiers described it as walking inside ink. Every sound carried a question. Was it an animal, the wind, or something waiting in the shadows? The jungle also changed the way the war was fought. Large U.S. formations broke down into small patrols, relying on helicopters, radios, and instinct. Meanwhile, the Viet Cong used the forest as a shield, appearing suddenly and vanishing just as fast. Even seasoned troops admitted that the environment felt alive, unpredictable, and sometimes almost hostile. As one veteran said, "You didn't fight the Viet Cong every day, Weets, but you fought the jungle every single minute." This unforgiving landscape shaped strategies, slowed movements, wore down morale, and turned every mission into a test of endurance. In Vietnam, the jungle wasn't just the backdrop of the war, it was the battlefield itself, a silent enemy that never rested. The tunnels of the Viet Cong. Beneath the soil of Vietnam, a hidden world existed, an underground universe carved by hand, stretching for miles. The Cu Chi tunnels, along with many smaller networks across the countryside, formed a vast system designed for one purpose: survival. Inside these narrow passageways, the Viet Cong created an entire underground life. They dug sleeping quarters, storage rooms for weapons and food, meeting chambers, and even underground kitchens with special chimneys that dispersed smoke so it couldn't be seen from above. Some tunnel networks had multiple levels, each one deeper and more protected than the last. There were trapdoors, camouflaged entrances, and emergency escape routes leading to rivers, forests, or hidden safe zones. For American troops on the surface, these tunnels were almost impossible to detect. A squad could walk directly over a complete base without ever knowing it. It was like fighting an enemy who could vanish into the earth. This underground engineering gave the Viet Cong a powerful advantage: the ability to strike quickly, disappear instantly, and survive in a landscape dominated by superior U.S. firepower. In the Vietnam War, the battle wasn't only fought in the jungle, it was also fought in the darkness below. The helicopter, America's key weapon. If the tunnels symbolized the strategy of the Viet Cong, then the helicopter, especially the legendary UH-1 Huey, became the beating heart of the American war effort in Vietnam. For the first time in military history, helicopters weren't just support vehicles. They defined how an entire war was fought. The Huey brought mobility to a battlefield where movement was almost impossible. The dense jungle, muddy terrain, steep mountains, and narrow trails made traditional vehicles nearly useless. But the helicopter soared over all obstacles. It could land in small clearings, rice paddies, hilltops, or even improvised landing zones cut by soldiers minutes earlier. Every day, Hueys carried out missions that kept American forces alive. Troop transport, inserting infantry directly into combat zones. Medical evacuation, lifting the wounded out of danger in minutes. Supply runs, delivering food, ammunition, and equipment to remote units. Close air support, armed versions providing covering fire from above. For soldiers on the ground, the thumping sound of Huey rotors became a symbol of hope. It meant help was coming, reinforcements, supplies, or a way out. Many veterans described that sound as unforgettable, a reminder that they were not alone in the jungle. Inside American bases, helicopter traffic never stopped. Day and night, crews prepared missions, loaded gear, checked engines, and lifted into the sky again. pilots and door gunners faced enormous risks, often flying low through valleys or hovering under enemy fire to rescue stranded troops. Their courage became one of the defining stories of the war. The Huey changed combat logistics forever. Instead of slow ground convoys, the U.S. could now move entire platoons across miles of hostile terrain in minutes. It allowed rapid reaction, quick withdrawals, and coordinated assaults, unlike anything seen before. Even decades later, the image of a Huey lifting off against a sunset or landing in tall elephant grass remains one of the most iconic scenes of the Vietnam War. The major operations. Throughout the Vietnam War, several major operations shaped the direction of the conflict, each revealing how strategies changed, escalated, or failed over time. Let's start with Operation Rolling Thunder. Launched in 1965, it was one of the longest bombing campaigns in U.S. history. The goal was simple on paper: weaken North Vietnam by destroying roads, bridges, factories, and supply routes. But the reality was more complex. North Vietnam adapted quickly, using camouflage, hidden tunnels, and rapid repairs. Despite the massive firepower, Rolling Thunder failed to break the enemy's determination. Then came Operation Linebacker in 1972. Unlike Rolling Thunder, Linebacker was far more targeted and aggressive. The U.S. focused on cutting the flow of weapons and supplies traveling down the Ho Chi Minh Trail. With new technologies, like guided bombs, the campaign had a bigger impact. It significantly slowed Northern forces and marked one of the few moments when air power truly shifted momentum. And finally, the most famous event of the war, the Tet Offensive of 1968. In a coordinated surprise attack, Viet Cong and North Vietnamese forces struck more than 100 cities and military bases across South Vietnam. Militarily, the U.S. eventually pushed the attackers back. But psychologically, Tet changed everything. The scale of the attack shocked the American public. It revealed that the enemy was far stronger and more organized than the government had claimed. Overnight, public confidence collapsed, and support for the war never recovered. These major operations show one thing clearly: strategy, technology, and firepower alone could not guarantee victory. Daily life of soldiers. What did daily life really look like for the soldiers who fought in Vietnam? Beyond the battles and the tactics, there were long hours, even days, of waiting, marching, listening, and simply trying to adapt to a world far from anything they had ever known. A soldier's pack was always heavy. Inside, he carried the essentials: rations, a radio or batteries, a helmet, extra socks, a poncho, ammunition, and maybe, just maybe, a small letter or a photo tucked away to remind him of home. Rations came in small brown C-ration cans, or later in lightweight pouches. Some soldiers loved certain meals, others traded them like currency. A piece of chocolate, a tin of fruit, or a packet of instant coffee could brighten an entire day. Sharing food often brought soldiers together. The simple act of eating side by side reminded them that they weren't alone. Communication was another lifeline. Radios crackled constantly with requests, warnings, and updates. For radio men, this meant carrying heavy equipment and staying alert. Their radios could mean the difference between rescue and isolation. But the most emotional messages weren't spoken through the radio. They came in the form of letters. Mail call was one of the most anticipated moments. A letter from home, even a short one, could lift morale instantly. When a soldier opened an envelope, he was no longer in the jungle for a moment. He was back in his kitchen, hearing his mother's voice, picturing his wife's handwriting, or imagining the streets he used to walk. Many soldiers kept letters tucked deep inside their packs until the paper softened with age. But life wasn't only about sentiment. Soldiers faced exhaustion every day. The heat was relentless. Uniforms stayed wet from sweat or rain. Boots rubbed painfully against skin, and long patrols meant minimal rest. Nights were often the hardest. The jungle grew louder in darkness, full of insects, distant echoes, and unfamiliar sounds that tested nerves. Sleep came in short moments, interrupted by guard rotations or sudden radio calls. Despite all this, camaraderie remained the strongest force that held units together. Soldiers formed bonds through hardship, cleaning weapons side by side, sharing jokes, listening to music on small tape players, or simply talking quietly during long nights. These small rituals didn't just pass the time. They gave soldiers a sense of normalcy, a reminder of who they were before the war. Some kept diaries. Others sketched in notebooks. Many carried small good luck charms, dog tags from a friend, a coin, a folded prayer card, or a bracelet. These objects weren't just personal items. They were anchors to identity, helping young men stay grounded in a place that often felt unreal. Behind every mission, every patrol, every operation, there were human beings navigating a daily routine that mixed fear, boredom, duty, and moments of unexpected warmth. They were young, many only 18 or 19, trying to make sense of a world far from home, supported by friendship and small fragments of normal life. Daily life in Vietnam wasn't defined only by combat. It was defined by endurance, connection, and the constant hope of making it through one more day. Why the U.S. lost the Vietnam War. On paper, the United States possessed one of the most powerful militaries the world had ever seen. Advanced aircraft, helicopters, artillery, logistics, and a massive budget. So how did such a superpower struggle and ultimately fail in Vietnam? The answer isn't simple. It's a combination of geography, strategy, politics, and human factors that created a conflict unlike any conventional war America had fought before. First, the terrain. Vietnam's dense jungles, mountains, rice paddies, swamps, and narrow villages created an environment that neutralized much of America's technological advantage. Helicopters couldn't see beneath the jungle canopy. Radar struggled. Patrols moved slowly. The land itself became an enemy, humid, muddy, unpredictable, wearing down even the best trained soldiers. The Viet Cong, however, moved through this terrain with ease. It was their home. Second, the enemy's strategy. The Viet Cong and North Vietnamese army rarely engaged in traditional open battles. Instead, they used ambushes, hit-and-run tactics, hidden supply routes, and elaborate tunnel systems. They blended into villages, farms, and crowds. To U.S. troops, almost anyone could be a fighter, and this uncertainty created confusion, fear, and hesitation. Conventional firepower was less effective when the enemy simply refused to fight conventionally. Third, limited local support. Although many South Vietnamese civilians opposed communism, they did not always trust the South Vietnamese government or U.S. goals. Corruption, instability, and internal tensions weakened South Vietnam from the inside. Without strong, unified local support, the U.S. struggled to build long-term stability. Fourth, the war's political restrictions. Major decisions were influenced by Cold War strategy, diplomacy, and fear of escalating into a wider war with China or the Soviet Union. As a result, the military could not always strike targets or pursue operations freely. Political limits created a sense of fighting with one hand tied, leading to frustration among commanders and troops. Fifth, the war's impact on American society. As casualties rose and progress remained unclear, public support in the United States declined sharply. Graphic news coverage, anti-war protests, and growing distrust in government created pressure at home. For many Americans, the war felt distant, endless, and without purpose. This domestic opposition made sustaining a long conflict extremely difficult. Finally, the lack of a clear objective. Was the goal to stop communism, defend South Vietnam, destroy the Viet Cong, negotiate peace? The mission changed over time, creating confusion and inconsistent strategies. Without one unified objective, progress was hard to measure, and victory even harder to define. By the early 1970s, all these factors combined: a challenging environment, a determined enemy, political limits, declining public support, and unclear goals. The U.S. military fought bravely, but the conflict's structure made long-term success nearly impossible. In the end, the Vietnam War became less about winning battles and more about the difficulty of fighting a war without borders, without clear lines, and without a clear pathway to victory. End of the war and legacy. In 1975, Saigon fell. The war officially ended, but its impact remains deep. Millions displaced. Long-lasting psychological and cultural scars. Environmental destruction. Veterans returning home changed forever. Vietnam itself rebuilt over decades, but the memory of this war still shapes the modern world. Conclusion. The Vietnam War wasn't just a battle of armies. It was a clash of ideologies, geography, technology, and human endurance. Understanding it helps us understand the world we live in today. Thank you for watching, and stay curious.